Well, good evening and welcome back to Wednesday Night Live, coming to you from beautiful Pocatello, Idaho, in the beautiful Portneuf Valley, gateway to the great Northwest. We have what I hope you'll find is an interesting program tonight, and before we get into it, as I always do, I want to quickly remind you about Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. These people are doing God's work, and I never use that word lightly. They are the counterpart, if you will. They are the antithesis, if you will, of Planned Parenthood. In other words, Compassion and Hope is all about life. Life for the unborn, life for the mothers, life for the fathers. So as I remind you every week, those of you who live out of state, the phone number, the area code here is 208, and the phone number for Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center is 478-HOPE, 478-HOPE. That's 2082. Why don't you give them a call, see what you can do to help them. Remember, they're all about life, and there are a lot of people out there that maybe don't think that other outfit is really what they need. Certainly life is worth living. So I have, as I've had for the last few weeks, a 30-second just a little piece on life to show you and give you a little better idea why I make a big deal about this every week. And I got to give Josh a minute there. Josh, are we in good shape to get that on there? Nope, almost, yeah. It takes a little while. Our equipment is just a little bit primitive, and so we don't have, we can't always get right to the next thing. So let me remind you again, Compassion and Hope Pregnancy Center. This is a place where unwed mothers-to-be can go to give life to that child that they maybe weren't expecting or came out of the blue. So anyway, let's show you the reason why I always make a big deal about that. Okay, Josh. Of course, that little clip is courtesy of Focus on the Family, the good folks over there that do a lot of good work and do God's work. And this is one of the many things they do. So remember, Compassion and Hope in your prayers, and if you have the opportunity, give them a call and see if there's anything else you can do to help them. Now, we've had some interesting developments happening here in Pocatello as well as on Idaho, and I'm going to probably stick with two subjects tonight. And before I do, though, I want to remind you, you'll see the crawler going across the screen pretty soon that gives you my email address where you can send me your comments and whatever you want to say. I always welcome constructive criticism. If there's an idea you think that you'd like to share with me, something you'd like to see on the show, go to, you see it on the crawler now, Wednesday night. It's Wednesday.night. I tried it just doing it without the dots and I wasn't able to find it, but maybe you can. But go to that Gmail address. Now, I promise you, I give you my solemn word that anything you send to me, I will get rid of your email address. It goes nowhere else. I'm not going to share it. I'm not going to sell it. And it goes nowhere else. But I want you to feel secure that you can communicate with me, and I will communicate back with you at that same site. I do have some handouts, some printouts, that I would be very happy to share with you, and I've spoken of this before. We've had a couple takers, and I hope we have some more that I will share. It's not expensive for me to run them off and print them and get them to you. Gives you a better idea of the other thing we're going to talk about tonight, and that's the so-called homosexual agenda. But we're going to start off with something a little closer to home. You may recall that last week the city of Pocatello authorized they don't have to build it, but the construction of a mosque right just down the street from the university. And there are a lot of questions that come up with a mosque, and you're going to see better why we have any questions. One of my questions that has not been completely answered, it was kind of alluded to supposedly during the hearings, and that is, are we going to be regaled 5 times a day by listening to the speakers outside the mosque calling the faithful to prayer? Because I don't think we should have to be subjected to that as a community. Some smart aleck thought it was really cute to say, oh yeah, well what about church bells? Well, when was the last time you heard church bells? And they're not 5 times a day, every day. So not even a good comparison. But I don't think that we as a community should have to listen to the calls to prayer for the Muslim faithful 5 times a day. The story in the newspaper was that there are about 150 faithful and adherents that had no place else to go, and they wanted this mosque. And isn't it great that they found this restaurant that was no longer there, and now it's going to be a mosque? So we've got just one more thing that's not on the tax rolls anymore. Now it's going to be a mosque. So we want to talk a little bit about mosques, and more specifically about Islam. I got a letter the other day. My wife and I, from time to time, try to help the people at the Billy Graham organization. They do some outstanding work, and they work all over the world. And sometimes I wonder, Samaritan's Purse. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I got a letter that was over Franklin Graham's signature, and it's a form letter. I mean, everybody that does anything to help Samaritan's Purse got the same letter. But I wanted to share this with you. I think it's important because it is topical, and it goes right to to the issue of Islam in general. There's some introductory remarks there, and it's small type, so bear with me with the cheaters. I have to read it. The letter says, I've been especially troubled by developments in Egypt, where dozens of churches have been burned since last summer, and attacks against Christians are escalating. Islamists blame Egypt's 10 million Christians for supporting the army's overthrow of President Mohamed Morsi and the ouster of the Muslim Brotherhood. In Nigeria, the jihadist group Boko Haram has been attacking churches during Sunday worship. Get a picture of that. The Christians are in their church worshiping. And the Boko Haram, which is an Islamist organization, has been attacking churches, killing more than 900 Christians in the past year. Their extremist ideology includes the belief that killing innocent elderly people and children is acceptable for the cause of Islam. Please pray for the protection and strengthening of believers in Africa's most populous country, and especially for Samaritan's Purse staff and volunteers who are currently rebuilding a mission hospital there. In Syria, our brothers and sisters in the faith are being butchered by foreign fighters who have swarmed into the country to try to topple a government that has long protected the 1.4 million Christians in Syria. We praise God for our church partner there who continues to provide physical relief in Jesus' name for those who are suffering. In Iraq, where American soldiers fought so valiantly for freedom, terrorists are again on the rise. Since the fall of Saddam Hussein, 2/3 of Iraq's 1.5 million Christians have fled their homeland. And then it goes on to talk about that it's a desperate cry. Well, here's a letter here. Samaritan's Purse is working in parts of Iraq, and they got this message from one of their staff members. They had to black out some names on just a brief message. It says, quote, I'm sitting here with Reverend so-and-so. He received a phone call this morning from Baghdad where Pastor so-and-so told him that last night was an awful night, filled with car bombs very near to our church. The government phoned Pastor so-and-so and said, please be careful, as there's a threat for all churches right now. Pastor so-and-so is asking for everyone to pray for our church. Now, why do I share that? Well, I think it's self-evident. We're talking about the religion of peace. And now we're going to have a mosque for the religion of peace right here in Pocatello. Now, there are some who are going to, and I can see it already, I can see the tiny little brains down at ISJ saying, oh boy, we're going to get Lillig, he's anti-Muslim, anti-Islam, whatever they're going to say about it. And I've heard it from those people before, and it doesn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me that they'll try to, pardon the expression, crucify me, because I have very strong feelings about the religion of peace because of the face they're putting forth on the world. And please, don't tell me it's a small minority of Islam that's doing this, even if it is a small minority. And by the way, the numbers are over 40 million who are into, butchering Christians and Jews. But that's another point. But please don't say that, well, you're just an extremist, you're a radical right wing, or whatever you want to say. I don't need to hear it. Just listen and then study for yourself. And I say listen to those who are going to probably put letters to the editor or the editorial staff, or somebody at the ISJ is going to, and the usual suspects I'm sure will go after me for having temerity to speak about this religion, the religion of peace. But I'm going to do what little I can to try to, most of us, for me, I knew nothing of Islam, even after they attacked the Jews in 1972 in the Olympics. You remember how they butchered the wrestling team there? It was not pretty, and it went on for several days. And the so-called jihadists, the warriors of Allah, whatever they call themselves, butchered helpless, defenseless Jews whose only crime was that they were Jews, and the Muslims hate their guts, as they hate Christians also. I remember that very vividly from '72, and if you're my age or if you were around, you probably saw it on black and white television, as the rest of us did, in the middle of the Olympic Games. And look at all the preparations. I remember in the 1984 Games in Los Angeles, when my job on the field in the Olympic Stadium was to make sure that the Palestinian flag was not brought on the field. That was a lot of fun, because the Palestinian extremists were really determined to bring that flag on the field and see what they could get going in Los Angeles. Fortunately, other than one stupid cop that did a stupid thing, there were no problems in 1984. And now fast forward to Sochi in Russia, and the extraordinary preparations that they've had to do to try to keep the game safe for the athletes there. And thanks be to God, nothing happened that we know of. Sometimes things happen that we don't hear about because they don't want us to see the other face of Islam, or they don't want to show us where they were weak in an area. Remember a few years ago when the Religion of Peace went into the village and killed, I think it was 300 children in a school, and I forget how many people altogether died, because they're not happy with the Russians. So let's butcher children. That certainly makes a point. Pardon me. Well, this is, most of you probably know who Colonel Allen B. West is, or former, if you want to, former Representative Allen West from Florida. Allen West is a modern-day hero. He was a career Army officer whose career was cashiered, basically, because he wouldn't let his men, who were being subjugated to the rules according to the Obamianists, he wouldn't let them be cannon fodder, and he stepped in and had the audacity to lead from the front. What a unique thing in the Obama administration, someone leading from the front. But Colonel West was a career man. I think he might have been West Point, I'm not sure. Doesn't matter. He's a career officer in the Army, the kind of officer that most of us who have been in the military would like to think all of our officers are. And he had to leave the Army because he had the temerity to stand up for his troops. Anyway, he went on, became elected to the House of Representatives from Florida, got beat out by a very concerted effort by the Obamianists last year or the year before, and was replaced by a progressive Democrat, however you want to say it. My wife actually got this off the internet today. I didn't realize that Colonel West has a website, but you can go to it. I would suggest you do so. He has it's a very professionally laid out website, allenbwest.com, allenbwest.com. And that'll give you a moment, if you haven't already done so, to get your pencil and paper, because I will have other information for you. Anyway, she pulled this off of his site today, and I'm going to share this with you. It's titled, "The Religion of Peace Murders 59 Children. Boko Haram Strikes Again." The infamous Religion of Peace has struck again. Perhaps they were celebrating the news issued by Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel about U.S. troop cuts. As initially reported by CBS News and Reuters, gunmen from Islamist group Boko Haram stormed a boarding school in northeast Nigeria overnight and killed 29 pupils, many of whom died in flames as the school was burned to the ground. But that number has been revised upward to 59 killed. Quoting, "Some of the students' bodies were burned to ashes." Police Commissioner Sanusi Rafi said of the attack on the federal government college Buniyadi, a secondary school in Yobe State, near the state's capital city of Damaturu. "All those killed were boys. No girls were touched," Rufai said. The Islamists who struggle for an Islamic state in northern Nigeria has killed thousands and made them the biggest threat to security in Africa's top oil producer, increasingly are preying on the civilian population. Boko Haram, whose name means Western education is sinful. Think about that. In the northern Hausa language, have frequently attacked schools in the past. A similar attack in June in the village of Mamudo left 22 students dead. In September, suspected Islamic extremists attacked an agricultural college in the same region, gunning down dozens of students as they slept in dormitories and torching classrooms. More than 200 people were killed in 2 attacks last week, one in which militants razed a whole village and shot panicked residents as they tried to flee. They have also started abducting scores of girls, a new tactic reminiscent of Uganda's cult-like Lord's resistant army in decades past. Some may read this story and ask, who cares? I'm not advocating the United States police the world, but if we refuse to comprehend the global threat of Islamic totalitarianism, we are only fooling ourselves. This is not about occupation warfare, but strike operations against these non-state, non-uniform belligerents, and we must interdict their flow of financial and material support. Along with we must stop the PC, politically correct mantra of not attacking their ideology, stop calling them extremists, and refer to them as who they are, jihadists and Islamic terrorists. I'm waiting to hear condemnation from President Obama, waiting but not holding my breath. And that's from AlanBWest.com. Alan B. West, Colonel West, fought Islam, the Muslims, however you want to say it, the Islamicists. He fought them on their own territory, and he knows of which they're capable up close and personal. Well, are we ready for that next one, Josh? Okay. Before I go on with that, I want to show you this brief thing. I don't know if you've thought of it recently. We're being inundated with so much information, so much stuff coming at us from all sides. The homosexual agenda, the Obamianists agenda, destroying the economy. Now they're going to downsize the military to smaller than it was before the Second War. Think about the possible ramifications. Islam is on the march. They are determined to set up a world caliphate where there will be nobody allowed except Islam, Muslims. And they've been attacking us everywhere they can, and we're cutting back on our military strength to terms before the Second World War in the size of our structure. So that's kind of bringing you up to date on that. We'll get back into that. But Trey Gowdy, representative or state senator, I guess it is, maybe a representative from I think South Carolina. You've seen him before. He's got quite a background. He's one of the good guys, in my opinion, in the Congress, and he made this statement this is a couple of months ago, I think now, but it had to do with Benghazi. Do you realize? And here again, I say we're being inundated. We haven't spoken about Benghazi in any length for any time, because once again, the Obamianists have managed to, their friends in the press, which apparently is most of them, have managed to put a lid on this. While the Senate, God bless them, or at least they're trying to get to the bottom of it. And of course, the Obamianists are past masters at deceit and whatever you want to call it, obfuscation, hiding their sins. They're coming forth, but it's like finding hen's teeth. It's really difficult. So Trey Gowdy was asking, he addressed the press about Benghazi, and here's what he had to say.
Thank you, Jimmy. We will not waver in our commitment to see that justice is done for this terrible act in Benghazi. And make no mistake, justice will be done. That was the President of the United States over a year ago. We're investigating exactly what happened, but my biggest priority now is bringing those folks to justice. That was the President of the United States over a year ago. No one has been arrested. No one has been prosecuted. No one has been brought to justice. We don't even have access to the witnesses. You and the media were good enough for my 16 years as a prosecutor not to tell me how to do my job. And so far in Congress, y'all have been good enough not to tell me how to do my job. I'm not telling you how to do your job. But I'm going to ask you some questions, and if you can't answer these questions, then I'll leave you to draw whatever conclusion you want to draw about whether or not the media has provided sufficient oversight. Can you tell me why Chris Stevens was in Benghazi the night that he was killed? Do you know? Does it bother you whether or not you know why Chris Stevens was in Benghazi? Do you know why we were the last flag flying in Benghazi after the British had left and the Red Cross had been bombed? Do you know why requests for additional security were denied? Do you know why an ambassador asking for more security days and weeks before he was murdered, and those requests went unheeded? Do you know the answer to why those requests went unheeded? Do you know why no assets were deployed during the siege? And I've heard the explanation, which defies logic, frankly, that we couldn't have gotten there in time, but you know they didn't know when it was going to end. So how can you possibly cite that as an excuse? Do you know whether the president called any of our allies and said, can you help? We have men under attack. Can you answer that? Do any of you know why Susan Rice was picked? The Secretary of State did not go. She says she doesn't like Sunday talk shows. That's the only media venue she does not like, if that's true. Why was Susan Rice on the 5 Sunday talk shows? Do you know the origin of this mythology that it was spawned as a spontaneous reaction to a video? Do you know where that started? Do you know how we got from no evidence of that to that being the official position of the administration? In conclusion, Congress is supposed to provide oversight. The voters are supposed to provide oversight. And you are supposed to provide oversight. That's why you have special liberties, and that's why you have special protections. I am not surprised that the President of the United States called this a phony scandal. I'm not surprised that Secretary Clinton asked, what difference does it make? I'm not even surprised that Jay Carney said Benghazi happened a long time ago. I'm just surprised at how many people bought it.
So there you have it. Josh, I think the speaker is broken in here. If you get a chance, could you? I'm not getting any. Is it broken? Yeah, I'm not getting any sound in here. Trey Gowdy, and if you've watched, if you watch C-SPAN or watch Fox, you see him periodically. He's a pretty sharp guy, and he asks some very good questions. And it makes you wonder, where do these people go to school that run the press now? What country do they live in? Do they even care? Are the Obamianists so powerful that they own every? They just tried to get through the Federal Communications Center, or whatever, FCC. They just tried to put somebody in every newsroom, and excuse me, I could almost see them having somebody sitting in here, because we're a public access television station, monitoring everything they're saying, and so they can say, Ralph, we don't like you saying Obamianist. People might get the wrong idea. It seems like they control every facet of our being. And Trey Gowdy asked some pretty important questions. Why aren't you people doing anything? And we ask ourselves that. We saw the infamous hearings with future presidential candidate, what's her name, Clinton. Who cares? What difference does it make? And then we see just the continuing march of the Islam, march of the jihadists, the march of the Muslims, marching forward around the world. We find that apparently, I'm told, that they have a very active recruiting segment here in the university, recruiting people from the Middle East, who we're going to have to assume most of them are Muslim, because Christians and Jews, they're lucky to be alive, let alone travel to our universities if they're in the Middle East. So those who come here, we will assume they are Muslims. Do you think they have our best interests at heart? And here we are recruiting them because I'm told they pay. I don't know this is a fact. Wouldn't surprise me the way the universities do business, but I'm told they like to have them here because they pay something like 3 times the rate that an Idaho student would have to. And of course, the Middle East doesn't have to worry about payment. We've been giving them our money for a long time. So now they're going to build a mosque to serve the so-called. And I can't believe there are 150 permanent residents, Muslim residents here in town, that they need that mosque. But I guess 150 on a constant rotating basis, perhaps. Anyway, well, let me just, so you don't think that I'm just a total alarmist, which maybe some of you do, let me share why I have some concerns about, why don't we know about Benghazi? Why is our government covering everything up? How do we keep putting ourselves more and more vulnerable to the religion of peace, who has sworn to kill everybody that does not submit? The word Islam means submit or submission. So if you don't Islam to the jihadists or whatever, then off with your head. Well, they don't just take it off. They like to saw it off. They really like to, and they like to, I don't know if I probably can't show you the footage I had. I really thought about showing it to you, where It's one of the schools they have where they're teaching the kids, these are preteens, they're teaching them how to behead their enemies. And one of these boys, I think he's 12 years old, they show him how to do it, and he does a mock beheading of one of his little school friends, and he has a couple of assistants that help hold the kid's head back so they can expose his throat. I mean, they go through the whole thing. And then shortly after that, they have this 12-year-old boy actually behead somebody. All in the name of Allah, of course, the religion of peace. Well, let me give you just an example of why I have some concerns about having a mosque here. And yeah, am I being narrow-minded about a religious group? Yeah, because Islam is more than just a religion, and maybe hopefully we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, this is a perspective by Dr. Peter Hammond. Dr. Hammond's doctorate is in theology. He was born in Cape Town in 1960, grew up in Rhodesia, and converted to Christianity in 1977. In addition to his academic work, he is a missionary. Hope you'll find this informative. This is adapted from Dr. Peter Hammond's book, Slavery, Terrorism in Islam, The Historical Roots and Contemporary Threat. Islam is not a religion, nor is it a cult. It is in its fullest form. It is a complete, total, 100% system of life. Islam has religious, legal, political, economic, social, and military components. Now think about your own faith. I don't care what it is. Does your own faith have all of these components? Religious, legal, political, economic, social, and military. Now your religion may have some of these. The religious component is a beard for all the other components. Islamization begins when there are sufficient Muslims in a country to agitate for their religious privileges. If you get an opportunity, go on the internet and look up Dearborn, Michigan, and the Muslims in Dearborn, Michigan. They basically are Dearborn, Michigan these days. You'll see some interesting things on how the Dearborn conducts business of the daily life. When politically correct, tolerant, and culturally diverse societies agree to Muslim demands for their religious privileges, some of the other components tend to creep in as well. Here's how it works. As long as the Muslim population remains around or under 2% in any given country, they will, for the most part, be regarded as a peace-loving minority and not as a threat to other citizens. This is the case in the United States, where they're about 0.6%. In Australia, they're 1.5%. Canada, 1.9%. China, 1.8%. Italy, 1.5%. Norway, 1.8%. At 2% to 5%, they begin to proselytize from other ethnic minorities and disaffected groups, often with major recruiting from the jails and among street gangs. This is happening in Denmark, where their population is now 2%. Actually, this is actually a little outdated. Their population is more than 2% now. Germany, where it's 3.7%. United Kingdom is 2.7%. Spain is 4%. Thailand is 4.5%. From 5% on, they exercise an inordinate influence in proportion to their percentage of the population. For example, they will push for the introduction of halal, clean by Islamic standards, foods. In Jewish, the Jews would call it kosher, clean. Excuse me. Thereby securing food preparation jobs for Muslims. They will increase pressure on supermarket chains to feature halal on their shelves, along with threats for failure to comply. This is occurring in France, where the population is 8%. Philippines, 5%. Sweden, 5%. Switzerland, 4.3%. Netherlands, 5.5%. Trinidad and Tobago, almost 6%. At this point, they will work to get the ruling government to allow them to rule themselves within their ghettos, self-imposed ghettos, under Sharia, the Islamic law. The ultimate goal of Islamists is to establish Sharia law over the entire world. When Muslims approach 10% of the population, they tend to increase lawlessness as a means of complaint about their conditions. In Paris, we are already seeing car burnings. Any non-Muslim action offends Islam and results in uprisings and threats, such as in Amsterdam's, with opposition to Muhammad cartoons and films about Islam. Such tensions are seen daily, particularly in Muslim sections in Guyana, where there's 10%, India 13.4%, Israel 16%, Kenya 10%, and Russia 15%. After reaching 20%, nations can expect hair-trigger rioting, jihad militia formations, sporadic killings, and the burnings of Christian churches and Jewish synagogues, such as in Ethiopia, where it's 32.8%. At 40%, nations experience widespread massacres, chronic terror attacks, and ongoing military warfare, such as in Bosnia, 40%, Chad, 53%, Lebanon, 59%. From 60%, nations experience unfettered persecution of non-believers of all other religions, including non-conforming Muslims, sporadic ethnic cleansing, genocide, use of Sharia law as a weapon, and jizya, the tax placed on infidels, such as in Albania, 70% Muslim, Malaysia, 60.4%, Qatar, 77.5%, and Sudan, 70%. After 80% expect daily intimidation and violent jihad, some state-run ethnic cleansing, and even some genocide, as these nations drive out the infidels and move toward 100% Muslim. Such has been experienced and in some ways is ongoing in Bangladesh, Egypt, Gaza, Indonesia, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Morocco, Pakistan, Palestine, Syria, Tajikistan, Turkey, and United Arab Emirates. 100% will usher in the peace of Dar es Salaam, the Islamic house of peace. Here there's supposed to be peace because everybody is a Muslim. The madrasas are the only schools and the Quran is the only word, such as in Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Somalia, and Yemen. Unfortunately, peace is never achieved, as in these 100% states, the most radical Muslims intimidate and spew hatred and satisfy their bloodlust by killing less radical Muslims for a variety of reasons. And then he goes on, he says, before I was 9, I had learned the basic canon of Arab life. It was me against my brother, me and my brother against our father, my family against my cousins, and the clan and all of us against the world. It is important to understand that in some countries with well under 100% Muslim population, such as in France, the minority Muslim population live in ghettos, within which they are 100% Muslim, and within which they live by Sharia law. The national police do not even enter these ghettos. There are no national courts, nor schools, nor non-Muslim religious facilities. In such situations, Muslims do not integrate into the community at large. The children attend madrasas. They learn only the Quran. To even associate with an infidel is a crime punishable with death. Therefore, in some areas of certain nations, Muslim imams and extremists exercise more power than the national average would indicate. They may have 4 wives. Today's 1.5 billion Muslims have up to 22% of the world's population. But their birth rate dwarfs the birth rates of Christians, Hindus, Buddhists, Jews, and all other believers. Muslims will exceed 50% of the world's population by the end of this century, adapted from Dr. Peter Hammond's book. And now this is interesting. Obama appoints 2 devout Muslims to Homeland Security posts. Hello? Obama and Janet Napolitano appoint Arif Ali Khan, a devout Muslim, as Assistant Secretary for Policy Development. Well, it goes on. We have another film. This takes a little bit longer, but I wanted to share this with you. And if you would like copies of this, this information about the Muslims and how the population can overwhelm you, just drop me an email, and I will be glad to send this to you, no charge. I feel a certain responsibility to educate as many as I can about the dangers of Islam and Sharia law. Now, we're going to show another disc here, and this is Senator Rand Paul. Now, I can already see the wheels at ISJ turning about, oh yeah, the radical right. Lillig's on one of his things, and he's bringing in Rand Paul, that radicalist from the right, extremists, or however they're going to characterize it today. And you know, Mike Lee and some of the other Ted Cruz, they're all extremists. Well, you listen to this yourself, and you see if you how it fits you. This is about 19 minutes long, and then we'll have a few minutes to say goodbye or good night, and we'll move on. All right. So, are we good with that one, Josh? Okay. Here we go.
Thank you. I am headed to the White House, and does anybody have a message that I can carry to the president? And I am in a Toyota Prius, so I'm not sure if I can take all of his supporters with me, but if you need a ride back to the White House, we do have a Prius. We'll take you along. Today I want to talk about something, though, that is serious. Today I want to talk about a war that the mainstream media is ignoring. From Boston to Zanzibar, there's a worldwide war on Christianity. Christians are being attacked around the world, but you won't hear much about it on the evening news because the answer's not convenient. It doesn't fit the narrative we have been told about radical Islam. The president tries to gloss over who's attacking and killing Christians. The media describes the killings as sectarian. But the truth is, a worldwide war on Christians is being waged by a fanatical element of Islam. Ever since 9/11, commentators have tried to avoid pointing fingers at Islam, which is somewhat fair. It is fair to point out that most Muslims are not committed to violence against Christians, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is, and we shouldn't let political correctness stand in the way of this truth, the whole truth is that there is a minority of Muslims who condone killing of Christians, but unfortunately, that minority numbers in the tens of millions. Pew Research did a poll. It had indicated that 21% of Egyptians, 15% of Jordanians, many Jordanians are our friend, but 15%, 13% of Pakistani Muslims find terrorism acceptable, if not laudable. It's a minority to be sure, but if you add up the numbers in just 3 countries, it's over 40 million Muslims sympathize with violence against Christians. This shouldn't be understated. A Daily Telegraph survey indicated that there were 100,000 Muslims in Britain who fully supported the London subway bombings. 400,000 said they had some sympathy for these bombings. This is not a little problem, and it's not going away quickly. In Syria, there's an ancient Christian city called Malula, where they still speak Aramaic, the language that Jesus spoke. They've been Christians since the time of Christ. They're a small final outpost in the Middle East for Christians. The town was recently overrun by Islamic rebels. These Islamic rebels swarmed into the town and they demanded that everyone convert to Islam or die. Sarkis el-Zakam stood up and he answered them. And he said, "I'm a Christian, and if you want to kill me because I am, do so." These were Sarkis' last words. Sister Carmel of Damascus said of Sarkis, "His death is true martyrdom, a death in odium fidei, or a death in the hatred of faith." Make no mistake, this is about your religion. Elsewhere in Syria, Islamic rebels have filmed beheadings of their captives. They've filmed themselves eating the heart of their enemy. 2 Christian bishops have been kidnapped and 1 priest was recently killed. These rebels are allies of the Islamic rebels that President Obama is now arming. We are now arming Islamic rebels who are allied with Al-Qaeda that attacked us on 9/11. Does that make any sense at all? American tax dollars should never be spent to prop up a war on Christianity. But that's what's happening now across the globe. As Christians, we should take a stand and fight against any of your tax dollars funding any persecution of Christians. In Zanzibar, a tiny little island off the coast of Africa, a priest was recently shot in the head on his way to church by 2 Muslim youths. A message by the Muslim Renewal said, "We thank our young men trained in Somalia for killing the infidel. Many more will die. We will burn homes and churches. We have not finished. At Easter, be prepared for disaster." In Kenya, motorcycle assailants hurled bombs into a Christian church, injuring 15 people and breaking the legs of the pastor. In Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim nation, 3 girls were beheaded on the way to their Christian school. Make no mistake, there is an element of radical jihad in this. In Guinea this year, a Muslim mob attacked and killed 95 Christians and injured 130. In Egypt, just recently, 82 churches were attacked, leaving hundreds dead and wounded. Earlier this year, I forced the Senate to vote to defund the Muslim Brotherhood, and every Democrat voted to continue sending your money to the Muslim Brotherhood. I can tell you one thing, though. As long as I'm in the Senate, I will fight against sending any money to the Muslim Brotherhood. In Cameroon recently, 2 Christians who had converted from Islam were murdered. In Iran, American pastor Saeed Abedini is detained indefinitely, facing physical and psychological torture. They asked him to renounce his faith, the same thing they asked Sarkis el-Zakhem before he was killed. I've introduced a resolution into the Senate that says, and calls for, and says we should do everything within our power, within our voice, from the White House, from the State Department, from our government, to release Saeed Abedini. And I will not rest until Pastor Abedini is freed. Across the globe, Christians are under attack, almost as if we lived in the Middle Ages, or as if we lived under early pagan Roman rule. You remember the early Christian martyrs, our disciples, the disciples of Christ. It's almost as if that is happening again throughout the Middle East. This administration does nothing to stop it, and it can be argued that they are giving aid and comfort to those who tolerate these crimes. In Libya, the country we freed from oppression, the militias that apparently were guarding our ambassador have raided a Christian church, rounding up hundreds of Christians, accusing them of being missionaries, accusing them of having the crime of having a cross or a Bible. Many were tortured, and one Christian was recently killed by these same militias. In Pakistan last week, 75 Christians were killed, several hundred more killed in a bombing of a church. Asia Bibi is a Pakistani Christian. She sits on death row for blasphemy. She says it all began when she drew water from a Muslim well. As she was filling her bowl of water, a crowd formed and chanted, "Death, death to the Christian." She pleaded for her life. She was pelted with stones, punched in the face, and dragged through the streets. The local imam finally interceded to say, "If you don't want to die, you must convert to Islam." The crowd descended on her, beating her with sticks. Finally, the police stopped the attackers, only to arrest her. She has now been on death row for the crime of blasphemy. What I say is, until Asia Bibi is freed, not $1 of U.S. aid should go to Pakistan. Many of you have heard of Malala, the precocious 14-year-old who was shot in the head by the Taliban for the crime of wishing that girls could go to school. She's not a Christian, but even so, the radical Islamists cannot tolerate to hear this 14-year-old girl who seeks nothing more than an education, nothing more than the right to go to school. If you haven't listened to her, pull up one of her YouTubes and listen to her. She's amazing, this young woman, her poise, her elegance. But what a bizarre distortion of religion. Someone who would shoot a little girl in the head to make a religious point? I ask, where's the rest of Islam? Why don't they stand up and condemn this? The Urdu poet Praveen Shakir wrote, "They insist on examining the firefly in the daylight. The children of our age have grown clever." Radical Islam will end only when Islam begins to police itself. Only when Islam allows her children, like Malala, to examine the firefly in the daylight. Only then will knowledge, enlightenment, then will begin to glow and grow, and violence, religious violence, will recede. We should all pray for that day to come sooner rather than later. We send billions of dollars to Egypt, to Pakistan. We've helped put new Islamic regimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. President Obama now sends arms to Islamic rebels in Syria. In Egypt, the mob attacked our embassy, climbed on top of our embassy and burned our flag. I don't know about you, but I've had enough. I say not one penny more to any country that would burn the American flag. We must work to ensure that our country, our policies, our tax dollars are on the side of ending this violence rather than encouraging those who perpetrate it. This war on Christianity is not just abroad. It came to Boston this year, just in time for the marathon. 2 Islamic radicals blew up dozens of civilians. I guess they thought somehow killing women and children would make a religious or a political point. Now, you might argue, you say, well, maybe they weren't targeting Christians, but they certainly didn't target a mosque. Their motive, if you can perceive one, was not against our government, but against us as a people, a Christian people. How someone could believe that killing innocent people could further one's cause is beyond me. Shortly after the attack, I met one of the Boston policemen who was there, one of the first responders. He described his feelings, the horror as he witnessed this war zone, his sadness as he raced to apply tourniquets and try to stop bleeding, and just the death and carnage, what he saw as he showed up. He described his anger as he pursued these 2 Islamic radicals through the streets. He described that he felt it was justified. There was a shootout, one of them was killed. And if you're going to kill innocents, you will receive the same. But he also said that after we captured the last one, after we captured and disarmed the last bomber, he said he also described a special appreciation for American justice. After the younger bomber was apprehended, he said, we didn't drag him through the streets and beat him to death with tire irons. He will get a lawyer. He will get a trial. It's what makes us different from them. When I talk to our young soldiers, my wife and I have helped build a home for a young soldier who lost 3 limbs in one of our neighboring towns in Kentucky. When I talk to them and I ask them, what were you fighting for? What did you fight for? What did it mean to fight for your country? And they said that the essence of what we fought for was our freedom, our Bill of Rights, our Constitution. We have to believe and preserve those. That's what we're here for. That's what we're here to fight for. That's what our young men and women have put their lives on the line for. Now, some politicians say that this war on Christianity means that we must fight a large conventional war against all of radical Islam. Well, part of my point here is to tell you there's 50 million, 100 million. This isn't going to be fought with a conventional war. It's going to require Islam to police Islam. But there will be times, and we will have to defend ourselves. We were right to go to war after 9/11. There are times when military action is justified and necessary. I believe we must be willing and able to defend ourselves against the jihadist. But we must also re-examine our policies, because military action can at times actually enable and empower radical Islam. I think going into Syria could possibly enable Al-Qaeda. It could make things worse. So we have to be very clear about that. In Egypt, in Libya, and Syria, it's still unclear whether the war, the changes, or the new regimes are going to be more friendly or less friendly to America. To me, it doesn't make any sense to send American arms, American planes, or American troops to aid Syrian rebels or the Muslim Brotherhood, for goodness sakes. We should stop it. In the future, I see less and less conventional wars. I don't see the possibility of how 50 to 100 million radical jihadists are defeated, but they have to be contained and we have to defend ourselves. Make no mistake, we should actively defend ourselves. But the ultimate answer, I really think, comes that the rest of Islam that is not radical has to police radical Islam. The Islamic republics, they see us as invaders and infidels. They're never going to accept us through force of arms. Somehow, though, they must be made to understand that they must root out and destroy the sadists and killers amongst them, the ones who distort and contort religion to justify killing of civilians and children. Islam needs to remember and recreate the good in their history. For centuries, the Middle East was home to cultural and intellectual centers of ancient world. Math and science flourished in the Middle Ages. Tolerance and sophistication were the norm at one time in the Middle East. The great medieval physician Rhazes identified smallpox and measles. The great Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi made advances in algebra. There was enlightenment at one time in that part of the world. Islam carried the light of learning for centuries. They paved the way for our enlightenment. This history needs to be brought back to life again. Innovation in Muslim communities developed the magnetic compass, pens and printing. It was said at one time that books were printed in Cairo, passed out in Baghdad. I mean, the world really at one point in time in the Middle East was something that was very amazing. It needs to come back, but they need to figure this out. And the policing has to come from them. As late as the 1960s, it was said that books were printed in Cairo, read in Baghdad. There was a time in our history when Islam was policing itself. Most Muslims describe Islam as a peaceful and tolerant religion. At one time, they prized inquiry over the heads of infidels, the scientific method over fanaticism. I believe Islam still contains some of the roots of this classical traditions and can return to them. In the meantime, we must defend ourselves. Make no mistake about it. We need to understand that the war on Christianity is not being waged by a rare anomaly, but by a significant minority that numbers in the millions. Christians should be prepared for war, but actively seek peace. Reagan said we should strive for peace through strength, and I agree. I urge us not to lose sight of either. Too often, we've lost sight of peace as the goal. The message of the Gospels is not war. Hopefully, the message of Christianity, if listened to, can be part of an eventual peace process. In the meantime, take action. Pray for a solution. Hold your politicians accountable for standing up and protecting life and standing up against the war on Christianity. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Well, there you have it, Rand Paul, telling it like it is for the most part. Now, I would dispute some of what he says in the last 4 or 5 minutes when he's talking about the enlightened age of Islam. Most of what Islam had that has been put across by our American press, as well as many others, as pablum for the uninformed, Islam has produced very little of its own. They have conquered other nations and taken theirs, Spain, Turkey, or what we now call Turkey, Greece. Islam has produced very little on their own. Everything in Islam for 14 centuries has been at the tip of the sword. And no matter where it is, whether it's in the burning desert of Saudi Arabia, Mecca, whatever, or in Dearborn, Michigan, it has been at the tip of the sword. Now, I'm going to suggest again to you, and I'm going to ask you to get this book. You can get it online. You might even be able to pick it up as a used book so you don't have to spend the cover price for it. It's called The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. I urge you to get this book. There are many books you could read about Islam to inform yourself, but this is probably one of the best so that you don't have to get into it up to your elbows like you're trying to learn Shakespeare or something. But we need to know what's truth and what's fiction coming out of the press. And the American press has been very fictional in covering Islam and what it really is. There are other books I'll suggest to you later. Sorry. Something in this room always gets me. That will give you some other information about the Crusades, for instance. You may be surprised to know that the Crusades, by and large, were defensive. They were not offensive, as we're always told in American lore about the beauties of Islam. For instance, you think you know about Islam, but did you know Islam teaches that Muslims must wage war to impose Islamic law on non-Muslim states? American Muslim groups are engaged in a huge cover-up of Islamic doctrine and history. Today's jihad terrorists have the same motives and goals as the Muslims who fought the Crusaders. The Crusades were defensive conflicts. Muslim persecution of Jews Christians has continued for 13 centuries and still goes on, and there's more. Well, I had wanted to talk to you a little bit about Sharia law, but you can go to Wikipedia and look up Sharia law. I would suggest to you, if you have your pencil and paper handy, this is easy. Go to, on your internet, thereligionofpeace.com. Very easy. The Islam always portrays itself as the religion of peace. Go to thereligionofpeace.com. And then go to the section on violence, if you will, and learn more about them. Well, next week we're going to talk to you about Add the Words and the shenanigans that Nicole Lefevre and her troops. I have her game plan on how they plan to shove this down our throats and how they plan to force the legislature to add the words. We'll talk about that next time. Until then, God bless you. Thank you so much for listening or for viewing. I hope you'll return next week. Put this up on YouTube. Send your friends to YouTube and find this site, and we'll cover some more things that will be of local interest as well as perhaps national interest. God bless you and yours. Have a good, safe week. Until we see you again, good night. Thank you for viewing.